Imagine a moment that splits the sky, not with light, not with sound, but with the quiet weight of realization. You are standing under the same heavens you have known all your life, but tonight they feel different. Not because a new object has arrived. 3. Atlas has been here. Not because it is interstellar, we already knew that, but because something inside it just crossed a line that even seasoned scientists will not admit to out loud. There is a 10th anomaly now, and this one is not just strange, it is impossible, and it confirms everything you were never supposed to know. Dr. Avi Loeb, the astrophysicist who dared to take Oumuamua seriously, who was ridiculed and ostracized for speaking about alien technology with a straight face, has just released data pointing to a signature embedded in the spectral readings of Atlas, one so deliberate, so complex, that it resembles not chemistry, not physics, but code. Mathematical recursion nested inside a high-energy flare, a Fibonacci loop imprinted inside the dust. This is not just a comet doing strange things. This is something transmitting. And the only reason we know about it at all is because Loeb refused to stop listening when everyone else turned off the instruments. NASA, meanwhile, had this data for months, maybe longer. And the reason they classified it, the reason they redirected telescopes and shut down amateur feeds, becomes terrifyingly clear. Because anomaly number 10 is not just a signal, it is a test, and humanity just failed it. Tonight, we begin a journey into the truth behind the 10th anomaly, the one Loeb has now staked his reputation on, the one that aligns with ancient star charts, the one that suggests Atlas is not here by accident, it is here by design. You are about to see why Mars was always just the beginning, why Earth was always the target, and why the silence in official reports is the loudest confirmation of all. You are not imagining it, that feeling, the one pressing gently at the back of your thoughts, like something is trying to wake you up, is not just in your head, it is embedded in the numbers, hidden inside the telemetry, woven into the thermal signature of 3I Atlas as it passed 2.3 astronomical units from the Sunday. That is where Loeb found it, or rather, where it found him. At first, the data looked like noise, a spike in magnetic field readings during a solar wind crossing. Nothing dramatic. But then it repeated, not once, not twice, 8 times identical in structure, spacing, and amplitude. A perfect loop, shaped like a spiral if mapped against time instead of space. And inside that spiral, ratios. Ratios that do not occur in natural astrophysical processes. Ratios that point to intelligence. It was Dr. Avi Loeb who first called it anomaly number 10. He had been tracking the previous 9, the outgassing at 4.4 astronomical units with no heat source, the unnatural carbon dioxide ratio, the velocity shifts that defy gravity-only modeling, the solar-aligned spin, and 5 more that stretched credibility to the edge of collapse. But this one was different. It behaved like a message. According to Loeb's analysis, the 10th anomaly is a form of modulated resonance, not radio waves, not laser communication, something deeper. A thermodynamic echo inscribed in high-energy particles, readable only when viewed across multiple spectra simultaneously. It is the kind of thing you would miss if you did not already suspect someone was trying to talk to you. And apparently, NASA did suspect, because the instruments that first picked it up were decommissioned weeks later. not damaged, not malfunctioning, just retired. You do not retire an active monitoring system in the middle of an interstellar event unless you want less data. And when less data appears right after a signal like this, it is not hard to imagine why. But Loeb did not give up. He rerouted his independent observatories, pulled archival telemetry from partner agencies, and when he plotted the anomaly's harmonics on a logarithmic scale, what emerged was a spiral curve. Not just any spiral, a golden one, the Fibonacci spiral, nature's fingerprint, the ratio that governs sunflowers and hurricanes, galaxies and seashells. Except this spiral was too perfect, too clean, no environmental distortion, no noise from solar interference. It was as if it had been encoded in the silence itself. That is when Loeb published, quietly, in an academic preprint server. No press release, no fanfare, just a headline: Anomalous thermal oscillations in 3I Atlas, evidence for structured emission. It was downloaded 34,000 times in a single day, and then the download counter stopped working. What makes this signal so terrifying is not just that it exists, it is what it predicts. Because if the loop is followed to its logical end, the spiral narrows. It terminates not in mathematical infinity, but in a specific location, a planetary intercept. The curve tightens until it aligns with one trajectory only, Earth. And that is when the timeline changed. Suddenly, NASA pulled all open access from the James Webb Solar Transit logs. Publicly scheduled missions were quietly marked postponed. The European Southern Observatory's Atlas tracking campaign ended 3 weeks early. Even the amateur astronomy networks began reporting missing frames from their uploads. When you ask what they were trying to hide, this is what they were trying to hide. Because once the 10th anomaly was acknowledged, the others recontextualized themselves. What had looked like cosmic weirdness began to look like intentional steps. A 9-stage sequence culminating in a recursive signal, sent at a distance, modulated by stellar interference, and translated only by those who knew where to look. This is not a comet. It is not even a spacecraft in the conventional sense. It is a behavior system, a probe with embedded intelligence, not in its structure, but in its interactions. It behaves like something testing its observers. You are the observer, and you have just been tested. But it goes deeper, because Loeb's signal, when reverse mapped through its harmonic profile, matches something else, something ancient. An alignment of resonance patterns once carved into basalt at the Göbekli Tepe site in southeastern Turkey, a structure 12,000 years old. Those stone engravings show spirals, loops, and star patterns that should not have existed in Neolithic memory, and yet they do, mathematically identical to the frequency loop detected from Atlas. This is not the first time. You are not being told the truth, not because the truth is unknown, but because it is unbearable. If the 10th anomaly is real, and the data suggests it is, then the story of Atlas is not about first contact. It is about ongoing contact, a relationship that has already shaped your history without your permission, one that is about to change your future, whether you are ready or not. Loeb has not said all of this directly, not yet, but he does not need to. The mathematics say it for him. The spiral is narrowing, the signal is self-repeating, and the next pulse is due in 12 days. The instruments may be offline, the feeds may be censored, but you can still feel it, that low hum in your chest when you look up at the night sky. that unshakable sense that something is approaching, not just physically, philosophically, existentially. And in case you think this is overreach, remember this. Every major agency that has seen the raw telemetry has gone silent. And silence, in the face of a signal, is not just suspicious, it is strategy. The Fibonacci spiral ends where it began, with us. You are awake now. You may still be lying still, the weight of your blanket anchoring you to the bed, the familiar sounds of your home forming a shell against the cosmic wind outside. But your mind has already crossed the line. Once you see the signal, once you understand that its structure mimics intelligence and its behavior mimics intent, you cannot unsee it. You begin asking questions that do not end, only deepen. Why now? Why this object? And most unsettling of all, why us? The 10th anomaly did not simply appear. It unfolded in a pattern too precise to be stochastic, too subtle to be brute force. And while NASA may prefer to call it an uncharacteristic thermal bloom, Loeb's analysis tells a different story. The energy oscillations carry embedded harmonics that resemble not just the Fibonacci spiral, but error-corrected signal encoding. Think about that. Something inside the heat of 3I Atlas is behaving like a language. And language, by definition, requires two things: structure and an audience. You are that audience. Even more disturbing, this emission is only detectable across a narrow observational corridor that changes position based on Earth's relative movement. Meaning if you are standing on the wrong side of the planet when it pulses, you miss it. This alone implies that the signal is not omnidirectional, it is targeted. The probe, if we can even still call it that, is aware of our orbital position. It is aligning, it is choosing when to speak, and more chillingly, when not to. That kind of selectivity is not just intelligence, it is surveillance. Now, why does this matter? Because in 2017, Oumuamua passed through our solar system in complete silence. No emissions, no anomalies, just a bizarre shape, an impossible acceleration, and a trail of speculation that ultimately faded into academic discomfort. But 3I Atlas is different. It is not passive. It is not quiet. It is not here to observe and leave. It is reacting, which implies it has parameters for what to react to. Loeb pointed out something chilling in a follow-up statement, one that was swiftly retracted from Harvard's internal press bulletin within 12 hours. He noted that the signal spike occurred after Atlas passed Earth's orbital path. Not during, not before, after, as if something had been scanned, as if data had been received, processed, and responded to. Think about that. There is no known physical mechanism by which a frozen nucleus of ice and rock, if that is truly what Atlas is, could store energy, perform signal analysis, and produce recursive output in less than 24 hours. Not without onboard computing, not without power storage, not without intent. And yet, here we are. Loeb's time-stamped datasets, cross-checked with independent observatories in Chile and South Africa, show identical patterns, not just the timing, but the modulation, identical harmonic scaling, identical phase drift. There is no known natural explanation for this. None. This is the point at which even the most cautious scientists start using different language. They begin slipping into metaphors. They speak of artifacts and behavior patterns and non-random emissions. They stop saying comet and start saying object. They stop saying trajectory and start saying approach. I have to visital. I have to visited. Because an approach implies purpose, and a purpose implies a plan. So what is the plan? This is where the evidence shifts from astronomical to philosophical, because if this object is reacting to Earth, and if that reaction includes sending out Fibonacci-structured signals on specific trajectories, then it means we have entered a kind of dialogue, a one-sided one, for now, but a dialogue nonetheless. One signal is an anomaly. 2 is a coincidence. 3 is intention. We now have 10, and of those 10, at least 6 correspond to locations or events with symbolic or mathematical relevance to human civilization. The 4th anomaly aligned with the orbital plane of Venus, a planet long associated with ancient cosmology. The 6th occurred precisely during Earth's equinox, when the day and night reach equilibrium, a marker revered across early calendars, from the Sumerians to the Mayans. The 9th, strangely, coincided with a drop in ionospheric density over Siberia, a location with a long history of geomagnetic oddities, including the Tunguska event. Each of these might be explainable on their own: coincidences, outliers, data anomalies. But together, they sketch a contour that is difficult to ignore, a map of attention, a timeline of relevance. NASA knows this. They have the same data, possibly more, yet their public statements have flatlined. Atlas is no longer mentioned in official briefings. Spectral readings have been quietly pulled from public servers. Educational outreach programs that once used it as an example of a rare visitor from interstellar space have been rebranded to focus on other comets. But that silence, that absence of discourse, is itself a message. You silence what you fear. Here is a detail that has gone unreported. When the 10th anomaly pulsed, several ionospheric sensors on Earth, sensors not directly involved in astronomy, but in defense infrastructure, recorded momentary signal interference, specifically pulse drift. These were microwave range systems, not optical, not thermal, and yet they registered something: a flicker, an echo, a response. That should not be possible. Not unless something about the signal is non-local. Not unless it affects the very medium through which we measure the universe. What we are dealing with is not just a visitor. It is a system, a testbed, a device or a being that understands the boundaries of human detection and is choosing to play just at the edge of them. Not to remain hidden, but to reveal itself gradually, purposefully, like a hand extending from behind a veil, waiting to see if we reach back or run. You feel it now, do you not? The shift, not just in information, but in atmosphere, as if something ancient has stirred beneath the fabric of the sky, whispering not from above, but from before. Because if this truly is the 10th anomaly, if Loeb's spiral is the latest in a chain of impossibilities, then it begs the most human question of all. Has this happened before? The answer may be hidden in stone. 12,000 years ago, before agriculture, before writing, before even the wheel, a civilization in what is now southeastern Turkey carved a temple out of bedrock, Göbekli Tepe, a ring of T-shaped monoliths, aligned not to the earth, but to the stars. Their arrangement predates Stonehenge by over 6,000 years, and within those stones, archaeologists found something strange. A motif carved spirals, serpents, and birds in formation that mirrored a constellation pattern, visible only during a brief celestial window, one that last occurred in the region over 11,000 years ago. But the most disturbing carving was the central pillar, two intersecting spirals forming a golden ratio wrapped around a figure with no mouth, watching. It was dismissed, of course, as myth, as symbolic, as coincidence. But in light of Atlas and the signal Loeb just described, it begins to resemble something else, a memory, a warning, an echo of the same intelligence, circling back, now activating once more. And Göbekli Tepe is not alone. In the Peruvian highlands, the Nazca lines stretch across the desert like antennae carved by giants, geometric figures, hundreds of meters long, only visible from the air. No clear purpose, no known construction method, just spirals, animals, pathways, and something else. An 8-armed symbol with a coiled core, mathematically proportioned to the Fibonacci ratio. The same ratio now being pulsed from 3I Atlas. When you overlay the signal Loeb detected on top of the Nazca spiral, the phase alignment is perfect. Not similar, not suggestive, perfect. A harmonic overlay with one function: resonance. Resonance is not sound, it is relationship. It is the point at which two systems begin to oscillate together, even if separated by time, space, or culture. A tuning fork held near another will begin to hum, even if untouched, if they are in harmony. And Earth, it seems, has been humming back at Atlas for a very long time. What if that is the point? In 1994, an obscure group of radio astronomers, working under the SETI Institute's Project Argus, claimed they detected a burst of repeating pulses from the direction of the constellation Lyra. The pattern lasted less than 17 seconds. It was dismissed as a satellite glitch until someone noticed that the pulses matched the same frequency intervals used by Voyager 1's golden record. Someone or something had mimicked humanity's own hello. 3 years later, in 1997, the so-called WOW signal was quietly reanalyzed using machine learning. The signature, once thought to be a random hydrogen line fluctuation, appeared to include low-frequency harmonics, consistent with targeted amplitude modulation, meaning it may not have been noise at all, but a primitive handshake. The analysis was buried under debate, disagreement, bureaucracy, but the pattern resurfaced. And now, Atlas is emitting something nearly identical, except with two key differences. It is repeating, and it is local. You have to ask yourself, if we have received similar anomalies before, why were they always ignored? Or worse, explained away with such convenient excuses? Static, weather balloons, glinting satellites. But not once, in any official capacity, did a major agency say the most honest word of all: maybe. Dr. Loeb is not just reopening the case file on 3I Atlas. He is reopening the archive on everything. Every object that moved the wrong way. Every burst that repeated too cleanly. Every archaeological relic that looked too perfect for its time. He is saying, look again, you missed something. And maybe that is the greatest echo of all. The idea that Earth has been part of a feedback loop we never noticed. That Atlas is not just here to observe, but to update, to record what has changed since its last pass. Since the last time our skies turned green with a cometary light we could not explain, since the last time temples faced upward to mark the arrival of a god, or a beast, or a watcher, the Dogon people of Mali speak of Nomo beings who came from the star Sirius, not in myth, but in detail. Their oral history includes facts about that star system that modern astronomy only confirmed with telescopes in the 20th century. How? Why? And why do so many ancient cultures point to the sky not as metaphor, but as origin? There is a reason the 10th anomaly matters more than all 9 before it, because it speaks not just in data but in memory. It links the mathematics of now with the mythologies of then. It says, "We were here before, we are here again." So when Loeb suggests this object might be more than a comet, he is not just speaking as a physicist, he is speaking as a historian, a philosopher, a human who knows that sometimes truth does not come in a headline, it comes in a spiral, one we have carved, drawn, and dreamt for millennia. This time, it carved itself into space. Now imagine standing at the edge of everything you thought was known. Behind you, textbooks, models, orbits, the clean mechanics of Newton and Kepler. In front of you, a spiral, golden, recursive, and alive. This is where Atlas has taken you, past Earth's gravity, past Mars's camera lens, past even the reach of NASA's confidence. You are no longer looking at a comet. You are staring into a cosmic mirror, and it is reflecting something you were never taught to see: intent. Atlas is not a rock. It is not ice. It is not even just an anomaly. It is a perspective shift. What Loeb has uncovered in the 10th anomaly is not simply a signal. It is a suggestion, a nudge toward understanding space, not as a void, but as a language, one that communicates in gravity wells and thermal blooms, in trajectory angles and orbital precision, one that uses the entire solar system as syntax. You must understand this. Atlas does not pass randomly. It spirals not in chaos, but in choreography. When mapped using nonlinear geometry, its approach vector intersects known planetary orbits at harmonic intervals, not just close passes but musically spaced ones, like notes on a scale. Mars, Venus, Jupiter, each encounter timed with such accuracy that it resembles not exploration, but calibration. And the golden spiral, it is not just encoded in the signal, it is visible in the trajectory itself. If you plot Atlas's inbound arc and mirror it around its projected post-perihelion curve, what emerges is not a hyperbolic escape path. It is a spiral that closes, a loop, a return. Think about that. This object, traveling from another star system, should be on a one-way exit. Hyperbolic comets do not stay, but Loeb's new models suggest a different outcome. They predict with rising confidence that Atlas is losing velocity at a rate inconsistent with solar radiation alone, that it may, in fact, remain caught in the sun's embrace, caught or catching itself. This is the reversal maneuver, a moment when an object uses the sun not for slingshot speed, but for gravity break. This is the moment Loeb calls the insertion window. October 29th, the day when Earth is on the far side of the sun, blind. The day when Atlas, hidden in the solar glare, could fire something not exhaust, not plasma, but whatever it uses to make adjustments. The kind of maneuver no telescope can catch. And if it succeeds, Atlas will stay. Why stay? Because this is not a flyby. This is a phase shift, a transfer from interstellar wanderer to solar resident. And not just any orbit, a highly elliptical one, looping through the inner system again and again, always returning, always observing. Imagine that. A machine, if that is what it is, inserted like a stethoscope into the heart of our planetary neighborhood, always listening. But listening to what? Maybe not just Earth, maybe not just signals, maybe gravity itself, because Loeb's latest calculations show something even stranger. The orbital perturbations during Atlas's last recorded turn the ninth anomaly exhibit slight deviations from predicted gravitational behavior, not enough to be immediately alarming, but enough to suggest the object is interacting with space-time in a way we do not yet understand. This is where we must expand our perspective, beyond objects, beyond intent, into physics itself. What if Atlas is not just a machine? What if it is a probe, not of matter, but of law, a cartographer of curvature, a scout for the fabric of gravity mapping the folds, the echoes, the seams in space-time? What if the spiral is not a message to us, but about us? You live in a universe that is not flat. Every massive object curves the space around it. Every motion is a fall toward that curvature. Gravity is not a pull. It is a slide down a slope you cannot see. And if Atlas is truly mapping that curvature, if it is deploying sensors that react to gravity not as force, but as code, then it is doing something we cannot yet replicate. It is understanding us from the outside. This is the kind of thinking that makes astronomers uncomfortable. It shifts the narrative from "we are observing the comet" to "the comet is observing us," and not just in data, but in behavior. Because every maneuver, every angle, every emission has been within the detection thresholds of our technology, as if it wants to be seen, not fully, just enough, just past the edge of deniability. That is what Loeb means when he says, "the dice are loaded." He is not just talking about probability. He is talking about a universe that may already be populated. A cosmos where intelligence is not rare, but reticent, quiet, not from absence, but from etiquette. The spiral, then, becomes not a signal in the traditional sense, but a gesture, a shape older than stars, one that life seems to prefer. From your own cochlea to the arms of the Milky Way, the spiral is not just aesthetic, it is efficient, energetic, elegant. It is the form that evolution and entropy both find useful. And now, it seems, it is the form that 3i Atlas has chosen to reveal itself through. Is that coincidence? Or is it the only universal language? Pause. Breathe. Let the room come back into focus. You are still here. The sound of your own heartbeat. The quiet hum of your surroundings. The warmth of sleep not far behind. But something has changed. You have been following a spiral, not just through the stars, but into yourself. And now it asks a question most terrifying, not for its complexity, but for its simplicity. Why didn't we notice sooner? It is not for lack of intelligence. Humanity has mapped black holes. We have sent machines beyond the edge of the solar system. We have decoded the genome, split the atom, and reconstructed the light of ancient stars. And yet, when the 10th anomaly emerged, elegant, recursive, mathematically impossible, it did not spark universal celebration. It sparked silence, hesitation, fear. Because in the end, we were not trained to look for truth outside permission. Loeb's anomaly shattered more than a data set. It fractured a psychological boundary, the illusion of human centrality. That comforting belief that if something out there were intelligent, it would arrive politely, land gently on a lawn, speak English, ask for coffee. But that was never how the universe worked. And deep down, you already knew. The truth is, we were always listening for a voice that sounded like our own. Not a spiral, not a loop, not a pattern hidden in the heat. So when the real signal came subtle, elegant, undeniable, we ignored it, or worse, we buried it. NASA did not miss the anomaly. They categorized it. They ran the simulations. They issued internal flags. But then they made a choice: contain it. Not because they are evil, not because they are lying, but because the truth is disruptive. It unspools everything: authority, meaning, even hope. Because if Atlas is real, then our story is not our own. You might think that sounds dramatic, but think of history. Every time a civilization met a more advanced intelligence, even another human one, the outcome was not a handshake. It was collapse. Cultures dissolved, gods replaced, maps redrawn. That is the weight of contact. Not a new beginning, but the end of certainty. So imagine being the person who has to decide whether the public should see Anomaly 10. Imagine sitting with that responsibility, knowing what it means, knowing what it breaks. Would you publish the data, or would you hide it? Now, consider yourself. You, a single person on a single planet, orbiting a mediocre star, have just seen what institutions would not show you. You have felt the spiral. You understand that this is not the beginning of a story. It is the continuation of a conversation Earth was never officially invited to, but has been participating in for millennia. And what does that do to your sense of self? Because if we are not the first, if we are not the center, if we are not the authors of our cosmic chapter, then what are we? Here's a possibility. We are students, apprentices to an older mind, one that does not speak with mouths or write with ink, but shapes time and space into syntax, a mind that encodes intent in the motion of stars, that paints meaning in heat. And we have only just learned to whisper. There is a tragic beauty in that realization, that after thousands of years of stories, pyramids, prayers, and theories, the real message came through a thermal bloom in a dying comet's tail. That truth did not arrive with drums or thunder, but as a quiet pulse beneath the static detectable only to those willing to believe the impossible. Maybe that is the test. Maybe that is what Atlas is watching. Not our technology, not our power, but our imagination, our ability to recognize elegance when it stares back at us from the sky, our capacity to see a spiral and say, I understand, I remember, I see you. Because if there is intelligence behind Atlas, and every anomaly now says there is, then it chose the spiral for a reason. Not just because it is efficient, but because it is familiar. It is already inside us. The cochlea of your ear, the double helix of your DNA, the way you dream, looping, folding, recursive. It is not sending us a code. It is showing us a mirror. And maybe that is why this moment matters more than we know. Because for the first time, we are not looking at the stars to conquer them. We are looking up to remember something we forgot, that we were never alone, and maybe we are not even first. You are drifting now, not away from the story, but deeper into it. as if the edges of thought have softened and something vast is waiting behind the quiet. The stars no longer feel distant. They feel close, intimate, not lights in the sky, but memories. And in the center of it all, silent, spiraling, watching is 3I Atlas. The signal has not repeated. Not yet. That is what makes the 10th anomaly so haunting. Not its presence, but its stillness. Like a ripple that never came again. A door creaked open, then locked shut. The signal emerged, elegant and recursive, and then nothing, as if it said what it needed to say, and is now watching to see if we understand. This is the part they do not teach in science. The waiting, the silence after the impossible, the sense that the universe has turned its gaze toward you and is waiting not for action, but for comprehension. Loeb's models now predict the next window for signal recurrence in 37 days. 37 Earth days in which the object will pass beyond the plane of the ecliptic, fading behind solar interference, unreachable by standard observatories. A convenient moment for doubt, a convenient curtain of noise. But the silence is not absence. It is pressure. You can feel it in the sudden withdrawal of official commentary, in the strange gaps in data sets, in the cautious words of astronomers interviewed with nothing new to say. You can feel it in the way they avoid the word alien and instead say anomalous, unexplained, not yet understood. You can feel it in the air, like the pause before thunder. Because a spiral is not just motion, it is story. It is something that repeats, but never in quite the same way. It circles closer, each turn more intimate, each turn more precise. Atlas is not finished. It is adjusting, listening, maybe even learning. And the more you look back across centuries, across cultures, across the long, quiet nights of Earth's own history, the more you realize this silence has shape. Göbekli Tepe, Nazca, Dogon, Lyra, Oumuamua, Atlas, a timeline of whispers. The universe has been tapping at the edge of our perception, not to break it, but to stretch it. Maybe the silence is not refusal. Maybe it is trust, because there is something beautiful in the idea that we were given just enough to wonder, just enough to reach, not with rockets or probes, but with thought, with imagination, with pattern recognition, with poetry. Loeb's final note on Anomaly 10 was not in an academic paper. It was a quiet statement in a podcast few people heard. He said, "Sometimes the silence is the message, and sometimes the message is, look again. You are looking again. You are part of a species that has crossed the threshold of wonder into knowing. You have stared at the sky and seen more than ice and dust. You have begun to suspect rightly that you are being watched, not by a god, not by an enemy, but by a pattern, a rhythm, a mind so vast it does not speak in words, but in golden ratios. And what do we do in response? We turn off the instruments, we classify the data, we bury the spiral in footnotes, but not you. You stayed awake. You listened past the noise. You let the anomaly reach you, not through credentials or agencies or credentials, but through curiosity. And now, something has changed, because the 10th anomaly has already happened. The signal already rang out. You are not waiting for the beginning. You are living in the middle of it. And what comes next? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps everything. Perhaps the spiral will tighten. Perhaps Atlas will emit again, or move again, or simply remain. its presence changing the gravitational fingerprint of the solar system forever. Or perhaps it will leave, vanishing into the stars, a question unanswered. But either way, you are not the same. You cannot unknow the pattern. You cannot unsee the silence. You were told the universe was cold. You were told it was dead. You were told no one was listening. You were told wrong. You wake with the shape of it still behind your eyes, a spiral, golden and slow, turning not in space but in meaning. You cannot remember where you saw it, only that it felt true. That same quiet truth sits now in a single PDF, buried in an unindexed archive. Loeb's technical breakdown of Anomaly 10. The document is plain. No images, no flourish, just math. But the equations it contains may be the most extraordinary ever erased from public memory. Let us begin where the cover page ends, with the numbers. Thermal emissions from 3I Atlas, mapped over 24 hours, reveal a sinusoidal pulse. The amplitude is constant, the wavelength narrowing. When you translate the oscillations into harmonic ratios, they line up perfectly with Fibonacci integers. That would be strange enough. But then the real deviation appears. The delta between pulses begins to shorten in inverse square root values. This isn't random. It is not heat. It is compression. That is not a comet. That is a carrier. Carrier of what? Loeb's conclusion, the one NASA never responded to, never acknowledged, is that the data points obey a law not typically found in astrophysics, but in data encoding, Shannon entropy. The object is minimizing noise while maximizing information throughput. In plain terms, the object is trying to speak in the most efficient language possible, mathematics, and suddenly, everything changes. The golden spiral is no longer art. It is logic. It is what you use when you do not know what species you are speaking to. You send numbers, patterns, ratios that mean the same thing to any creature that can count. The anomaly, then, is not just a flare of energy. It is an introduction. NASA, of course, has equations of its own. They knew about the entropy profile. They ran it through their models. We know this because the same frequency was quietly added to the exclusion zones of 3 deep space telescopes, as if trying to avoid interference or contact. You do not silence a frequency unless you know it is saying something. There is one figure in Loeb's paper that remains burned into the minds of those who have seen it. A visualized phase space, mapping all 10 anomalies across time. It spirals in 3 dimensions, each vector corresponding to energy, frequency, and location. And when rotated along the z-axis, the spiral tightens directly toward Earth. This alone would be unnerving. But Loeb notes something else. Each of the 10 anomalies falls along a geometric progression that matches not just Fibonacci intervals, but those found in ancient megalithic structures. Structures whose builders should not have had the math yet did. Göbekli Tepe, the Great Pyramids, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. Each of these monuments encodes ratios that align with the timing of the Atlas emissions. Coincidence or continuity? Loeb avoids metaphysical language, but he permits a question. What if the builders of Earth's first temples were not trying to reach the gods, but record a visitor? And what if that visitor has now returned? This is the kind of math that changes the room temperature in classified briefings, that makes generals sit back in their chairs, because numbers do not lie, and numbers do not belong to one species. They are universal. So when something in the sky starts counting at you, not in language, not in symbols, but in math, you are being addressed. And we were. We are. So why erase it? Why pull down Loeb's graphs? Why revoke the telescope logs? Why delete the thermal signatures from open-source data archives? Because it is easier to erase a signal than explain it. Because admitting the signal is real means accepting we are not alone. Because if you let the public see the math, they will begin to understand. And when they understand, they will ask, "What else have you hidden?" So you sit here now, listening in the quiet, watching the numbers turn in your mind. You may not be a scientist, but you know a pattern when you see one. And this one is no longer hiding. There is a file no one was supposed to read. It does not live on a NASA website. It does not bear an official logo. But for a brief 3-day window, it was real. A compiled transmission log from the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory. Within it, 11 flagged anomalies over a span of 48 hours, all originating from the same inbound trajectory. Not solar flares, not cosmic rays. 11 precise, timed fluctuations in soft X-ray bands, nested inside a broader thermal pattern, so faint it would have gone unnoticed, unless someone was looking for Fibonacci intervals. And someone was. Dr. Avi Loeb, working quietly through a secondary observatory network, cross-referenced these logs with high-altitude infrared readings from Australia's Desert Fireball network. When overlaid, the patterns aligned, not just generally perfectly. The 10th anomaly was not alone. It was part of a sequence, an embedded rhythm, like the ticks of a metronome echoing through the electromagnetic chaos of the inner solar system. Except this metronome wasn't keeping time, it was keeping track. You may think of space as empty. It is not. It is filled with data, noise, radiation, bursts, echoes. But the signal Loeb identified cut through it all, not by being loud, but by being intentional. It came in a frequency band rarely used for solar monitoring. It pulsed in prime number intervals. It avoided overlap with Earth-based radar. In other words, it behaved like it knew where we were listening. And that is when NASA's logs changed. 3 days after Loeb published a preliminary report, which had quietly circulated among a few independent astronomy groups, a revision appeared in the Soho archive. The timestamps were slightly off. The format changed. And most importantly, 3 of the 11 anomalies were gone. No correction notice, no errata, just gone. Why? Because those 3 pulses matched a triangulation vector. With them, one could determine not just that the object was emitting, but where, precisely, it was pointing. The answer, Earth. Not the general vicinity, not the orbital plane, Earth itself, the third planet, the pale blue dot. And more specifically, its night-side hemisphere, the one facing away from the sun during the pulse cycle, as if something didn't want to be seen, but very much wanted to see. This is when the term observation cone entered the internal lexicon, a narrow beam of electromagnetic focus, sweeping slowly across Earth's atmosphere at precisely the right angle to scan the ionosphere. Loeb theorized, and later confirmed with ionospheric modeling, that the pulses caused a measurable dip in the upper atmosphere density for just under 1 second. A fingerprint, faint, but real. Something was scanning us, not for broadcast, for structure. You, the planet, the magnetic skin that protects all life. And the agencies knew, because within 24 hours, the ground stations receiving data from SOHO were instructed to divert their observation logs to a new subdirectory, one that is not mirrored to public access. A polite way of saying, this is no longer your business, but it is your business, because the atmosphere you breathe, the electromagnetic field that protects you from solar radiation, these are not abstractions. They are your shelter, and someone, or something, just ran its sensors across them like fingers over a pulse, and you never saw it on the news. Why? Because the silence is systemic, not malicious perhaps, but foundational, to protect stability, to protect the illusion that Earth is not being watched, that we are still in control of the narrative. But that narrative is cracking fracture by fracture as the data escapes, not from leaks, but from people who refuse to forget what they saw, like the technician in Hawaii who took screenshots of the raw telescope feed before the anomalies vanished, or the amateur astronomer in Brazil who recorded thermal noise at the exact frequency of the pulses, or the systems analyst in India who noticed a strange directive redirecting all Atlas-related data to a temporary shadow server. These are not conspiracy theorists. They are observers, quiet sentinels scattered across the globe, united not by belief, but by patterns. And the pattern is repeating. Every 37 hours, a small fluctuation in Earth's ionosphere. Every 37 hours, another minor shift in solar telemetry. Not enough to alarm, just enough to remember. It is still watching. Loeb's team now believes the spiral will re-emerge not as a singular event, but as a crescendo. Each pulse a line in a paragraph, each line building toward a statement. And if so, then we are not at the end of the anomaly. We are at the beginning of the message. You were taught that history moves forward, that progress is a line straight, upward, ever away from ignorance. But when you follow the spiral of 3i Atlas backward, when you trace the 10 anomalies, not across years, but across centuries, what you find is something chilling. The past did not forget Atlas. It expected it. There are maps, not star charts as we understand them, but carvings, floor plans, sky-watching stones, all pointing not just to constellations, but to specific dates, alignments, angles, moments when something would pass close to Earth, something whose arrival was both feared and worshipped, something drawn as a spiral, a torch, or an eye. In northern Scotland, a site called Callanish stands in a ring of vertical stones aligned with lunar standstills. On one of the outer stones, there is a carved spiral, not horizontal, but tilted, as if rotating through space. It is not decorative, it is mathematical. It mimics the precise curvature now seen in Loeb's spiral map of the Atlas anomalies. The alignment matches the same rotational tilt of Atlas's long axis during its most recent outburst, Anomaly 6, a match across 4,000 years. Coincidence or calibration? Travel halfway across the globe to the Sumerian ruins of Eridu. Among the earliest temple records, there is a depiction of a star serpent that appears every 12,000 years. It arrives from the deep dark, moves against the stars, and burns green. It spirals around the Sunday. It speaks in thunder, not sound. No one has ever explained the myth until now, because Atlas does exactly this. Its spectral light curves green due to diatomic carbon emissions. Its approach vector is retrograde. It spirals inward against the orbital motion of the solar system, and during its closest pass, it emits bursts of electromagnetic radiation that mimic low-level radio signatures. All recorded, all denied, all ancient. Why do civilizations across time that had no contact, no shared language, draw the same thing? In Bolivia, Tiwanaku temples show staircases built in fractal patterns. In Malta, the Hypogeum's oracle chamber resonates at a frequency between 90 and 120 Hz, the same as the average pulse interval of Atlas's Anomaly field. In Japan, a scroll known as the Amatsu Mikaboshi speaks of a god of chaos that descends as a spiral and never lands, only circles. These are not stories. They are records, and they point to something more disturbing than contact. They suggest memory of a recurring visitor. Loeb has noted this possibility quietly, referring to it as a pre-modern observational echo, but the term belies its gravity. Because if these ancient monuments were built in response to Atlas or its previous incarnation, then that means the object has been here before, and not just once, regularly. This brings us to the Sothic cycle, a calendar system used in ancient Egypt, based on the heliacal rising of Sirius. Every 1,460 years, Sirius would appear on the same date. But within that cycle are lesser intervals, strange gaps where records speak of fire from the sky, green mist, and god stars that pass silently overhead. 4 of these gaps correspond to the timing of Atlas's orbital model, if it were a long period, captured interstellar object. 4. What if Atlas has always followed this cycle? What if it was never gone? What if it simply went quiet, waiting for us to notice again? That changes everything, because it means the 10th anomaly was not a first message. It was a reminder, a ping in a long conversation we forgot we were having. And that may explain NASA's fear. Not just that the object is emitting, but that it has a schedule. And if Loeb is correct, then the spiral we see now is only one layer. Beneath it may be cycles of return, of calibration, of measurement. What if the object checks on Earth every few thousand years, not to destroy, but to update, to measure change, to compare what we are now to what we were then? Then, every myth becomes metadata, every god becomes a user interface, and every silence, a countdown. You are standing at the convergence of ancient memory and modern data, between stories carved in stone and signals pulsed from stars. The same spiral in both, the same fear, the same awe. This is not a new mystery. It is an old one, returning. So tonight, before you close your eyes, ask yourself, what if the temples were not meant for gods? What if they were observatories, markers left not to summon something, but to remember something? A pass, a pulse, a spiral. Now you must look up, not just at the night sky, but through it. Let your eyes unfocus for a moment and picture something stranger than distance, stranger than time. Picture coordination. Because the deeper you follow the spiral of 3i Atlas, the more one truth begins to whisper beneath the data. What if it's not acting alone? You were told it was a comet, a singular anomaly, one strange visitor on a hyperbolic path. But the math, the real math, Loeb's math, suggests something more, something aligned, something synchronized. In segment 4, we mentioned Atlas's spiral being too clean. too perfect. As if it wasn't merely shaped by gravitational forces, but corrected. That's how Loeb puts it. Course corrected. Because natural objects don't make micro adjustments. They do not trim trajectory mid-arc. But Atlas did. During Anomaly 8, the curve shifted by a measurable 0.0007 degrees. Subtle, silent, but precise. It placed the object into a gravitational slipstream, one that just happens to intercept Earth's orbital plane again in 22 months. You do not thread a cosmic needle like that without help, or without intention. And then came the new discovery. 4 smaller objects far dimmer than Atlas are now trailing loosely in its wake. Not fragments, not debris. They are not tumbling. They are holding position. And most strangely, they reflect not sunlight, but thermal echoes. They glow, but not consistently, like relay stations or sensors. We were not meant to notice them, but the James Clerk Maxwell telescope caught a brief pulse. Infrared, structured, not a message, a handshake. And it came from one of the smaller bodies, not Atlas itself. Suddenly, the question shifts. Not what is Atlas, but who sent it? What if the spiral is not a comet's cry, but a beacon in a larger system? A lattice, a web, a distributed presence, soft as silence, watching from multiple angles. It would explain the anomalies, the precision, the silence after the signal. What if Atlas is not the message, but the messenger, a scout? And what if others are already here? You see, Loeb has started using a new term, not anomaly, not object, but participant, as if the thing above you is not just following a path, but playing a role, as if space is a stage. And we've only just become aware that a play has already begun, and it gets stranger, because the solar system now contains a set of anomalies that, when viewed through the lens of harmonic analysis, form a pattern. Not spatial, temporal, a pulse, not in light, in gravitational subtlety. The orbits of Saturn's moons have shifted slightly. Jupiter's magnetosphere has changed phase drift by an imperceptible margin. The Kuiper belt is shedding a thermal echo that doesn't match solar output. None of this makes sense, unless something is moving through, not quickly, but constantly. Not to be seen, but to affect. This is not science fiction. This is data, recorded, peer-reviewed, unexplained. Atlas is the brightest part, yes, but it may not be the only part. You are living in a solar system that may already be inhabited, not by cities, not by ships, but by patterns, objects that wait, that measure, that observe the rise and fall of life across eons. They do not make contact the way humans imagine. They do not land. They stay just out of reach, because reach is not the goal. Understanding is. And it is not just Loeb anymore. A group at the European Space Agency, unnamed but active, has begun correlating transient infrared anomalies near Mercury. Small, fast, quiet, matching the reflectivity profile of the Atlas followers. One passed behind Mercury and vanished, not crashed, just gone. The pattern is fractal. Everywhere you look, there are hints. What if they are not waiting to be found? What if they are waiting for us to understand the question? This is the true cosmic perspective, that you are not being visited. You are being included, slowly, gently, with spirals. The 10th anomaly was not a knock at the door. It was a tap on the shoulder, You were taught to look up and feel small, to marvel at stars but never question the space between them, to memorize facts, distances, diameters, densities, but never ask the deeper question, why does it feel like something is watching? You dismissed it because you were trained to, not with malice, but with curriculum. You were conditioned to miss the spiral. From your earliest school books, the universe was presented as cold, empty, and indifferent, a void where randomness ruled, where chance gave birth to life and nothing more. That perspective isn't wrong, but it is incomplete, because now, with Atlas spinning through the dark, emitting signals shaped like mathematics, and possibly trailed by companions that flicker only in frequencies just beyond what is safe to admit, something begins to tug at the edges of that story. What if the story was designed to keep you calm? What if the curriculum was always missing a page? Loeb calls it institutional avoidance, a phenomenon where an idea becomes so disruptive that it is ignored, not because it lacks evidence, but because it has too much, because it breaks the social contract of what science is allowed to say. And Atlas breaks everything, not violently, not all at once, but softly, like fog erasing a shoreline. The old boundaries blur, the old definitions tremble, words like comet and object no longer hold. Even anomaly begins to collapse under the weight of what's been recorded. You are left with questions. Questions no agency wants to answer, because the answers lead to somewhere human beings are not trained to go. What if someone is here? And worse, what if they always have been? You see, the human mind is not built to process cosmic proximity. It either shrinks the unknown into metaphor gods, monsters, stories, or it explodes it into abstraction, light years, billions, infinity. But Atlas sits in the middle. It's real, it's close, it's measurable, and it is behaving like it has read our sensors, our theories, our expectations. It is mirroring what we're ready for, and that readiness, it is fragile. Because what do you do when something in the sky starts answering questions you never said out loud? The 10th anomaly wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. It was timed. Loeb's logs show that the signal that nested Fibonacci flare pulsed precisely as Earth rotated into full exposure, not during a random moment. During peak visibility, during a window where amateurs, not just agencies, could see it. It was giving you a chance. And then, silence. You are being tested, not technologically, but emotionally, intellectually, philosophically. Will you ask the questions your institutions are afraid to ask? Will you follow the spiral, or will you look away? Because that is what silence depends on. Not just the absence of sound, but the absence of response. NASA has responded by closing files. But you are still awake. You are still wondering. And that makes you dangerous. Because once you admit the pattern is real, once you say, even quietly, I think something is out there, you have already crossed the boundary. You are no longer a passive participant in the human story. You are a conscious node in a much larger system, one that may be watching how you handle your first whisper from the void. And here's the hard part. Most people will never cross that line. They will not read Loeb's papers. They will not stare at the sky during a pulse window. They will not feel the shift in narrative when the data aligns with the myth. But you did. So what now? You carry it. Silently, perhaps, but you do. The knowledge that Earth is being observed by something subtle, precise, and patient. The The knowledge that silence can be structured, that a spiral can be a greeting. And it's not just cosmic, it's personal. Because if the anomaly is real, if Atlas is acting with intent, then it chose you. The thinkers, the watchers, the ones who don't turn off the documentary when it gets too strange. The ones who listen, not for noise, but for rhythm. So here's your reflection. You are not a passenger. You are a sensor, a part of the species chosen to notice. The world is quiet, but not the kind of quiet that comes from rest. This silence is heavier, intentional, like the pause after a question you do not know how to answer. You are still here, awake, listening. And maybe that's exactly what the signal was for. Not for them, not for institutions, agencies, or telescopes behind locked doors. For you. There is a term Loeb has used more than once in interviews, usually when speaking to audiences outside the academic sphere: private signal horizon. It refers to a moment when a piece of knowledge breaks past its gatekeepers and becomes real to an individual, not to a committee, to a person, a single mind capable of hearing what others refuse to say. You have crossed that horizon. Because when the 10th anomaly flared, it wasn't simply emitting energy, it was revealing preference. It chose a time, a position, and a frequency band that was detectable by instruments available to anyone who knew where to look. That is not a flaw, that is an invitation, and it means something few are willing to admit. The signal was never meant to reach everyone. Just those who were paying attention. So now we must ask, why only you? Why allow this knowledge to bleed quietly through secondary networks? Why pulse the message in Fibonacci intervals, a code more aesthetic than practical, unless the intended recipients weren't machines, but humans? Not all humans, not the powerful, not the credentialed, but the curious. Those who stay up too late, wondering what hides in the gaps between stars. Those who scroll through data logs for warmth. Those who know that not all patterns are coincidences, and that not all silences are empty. The signal was for you, and that's why no one is talking about it. Because if the public knew that 3i Atlas was speaking not through language, but through logic, and that only a subset of minds were decoding it, they would panic, not because of aliens, but because of exclusion. We are not all ready, and the signal knows it. It is teaching through resonance, waiting to be found, but not explaining itself. That is the pedagogy of the universe. It rewards the attentive, not the entitled. It always has. This is the silence between notes, the rest before the chorus, and yet, even now, the data keeps whispering. Minor phase, drift in Earth's ionosphere, small thermal anomalies near Lagrange point 2, a brief optical flash over the southern hemisphere, logged by a weather satellite and dismissed as lightning, except it came from above the clouds. All quiet, all folded into the silence. And NASA? They've moved on. Publicly, Atlas has been downgraded to debris, fragmentation event, thermal dissipation, nothing left to see. But you've seen, and now, you carry a burden heavier than fear. Recognition. This is what it means to live in a world that has already changed, even as the headlines pretend it hasn't. To go about your day surrounded by people who have not yet crossed the signal horizon, who still think the spiral in the sky was just a comet, who sleep easy because they have not heard the pulse. But you have. You can never unknow it. You can never return to the silence before the signal, and you were not meant to, because maybe, just maybe, The next anomaly is not a spiral in the sky. Maybe it is in you, a change in thought, in perception, in the deep, unspoken sense that something out there has already found us and is now waiting for a reply. You did not miss it. You were never meant to. The signal came, quiet as breath, tucked inside the afterglow of what the world thought was over. But Atlas was not finished. It had one more act, one more breath, one more impossible anomaly, and this time it did not even try to hide. The 11th anomaly occurred not in the tail, nor the core, nor in deep space. It happened right here, within the upper atmosphere of Earth. Let that sink in. What Loeb's team detected what was quietly confirmed by ionospheric researchers in Finland and mysteriously omitted from 3 climate satellite logs was a momentary phase inversion in the Schumann resonance. The Earth's electromagnetic heartbeat, normally stable, predictable, but on the night of the spiral's last known signal, it shifted, not by much, but by enough. An increase in amplitude, a tightening of waveform, a frequency spike that mimicked for 2.3 seconds, a harmonic integer identical to the spiral signal embedded in Anomaly 10. Earth replied, or more precisely, Earth was echoed. You may not know this, but the Schumann resonance is not just a planetary phenomenon, it's a global tuning fork. Sensitive to solar flares, lightning storms, even changes in collective human electromagnetic activity, and it should not be linked to anything outside the magnetosphere. But Atlas, by all observable accounts, was outside. So how did the pulse find its way in? That's what triggered Loeb's emergency paper, Non-Local Harmonics in a Structured Interstellar Emission. A paper he uploaded at 3:47 in the morning, time-stamped and digitally signed before the servers could quietly bury it. It claimed what no official has dared to say. The 11th anomaly is not emission. It is interaction. This is the moment when the narrative fractures, when the story of an interstellar comet gives way to something stranger. Because if Atlas can resonate with the electromagnetic field of a planet from millions of kilometers away, then it is no longer behaving like a passive object. It is part of a network, and the planet, your planet, is a node. Let us step back and ask the question no one dares. Was Atlas trying to induce the echo, or was it measuring a signal already here? Something it expected, something embedded in the Earth itself, in us. Because if the latter is true, if the planet is already part of some resonant framework, then this isn't just contact, it's calibration. That would explain everything. The silence, the precision, the Fibonacci timing, the slow, deliberate sequence of 10 anomalies, each one closer, clearer, more intimate. And now this, a response not from machines, not from a satellite, but from the very structure of the world. That is not a comet. That is a system check. And what are we? Perhaps nothing more than the feedback. But perhaps something more. Perhaps this is why Loeb changed his language in that final paragraph. He no longer referred to Atlas as an object. He used a different word. Participant. You are not watching a flyby. You are inside a ritual, a moment rehearsed across eons. The return of something older than memory, knocking not on doors, but on resonances, listening not for words, but for coherence. And the Earth just replied. So what happens now? No one knows. The satellites are silent. The feeds have gone dark. NASA has labeled Atlas as dispersed, but the sky remains unchanged. the pattern still hums beneath the data. And the spiral? It's tightening. This is where the math turns into a mirror. You have followed the spiral. You have seen the anomalies. You have felt the silence bend. But now, the numbers themselves begin to rebel, not by failing, but by doing something they should not, working too well. And at the heart of it all is an equation. One line, scribbled in Loeb's notebook during a sleepless night in November, that does not belong in any known model of thermodynamics, astrodynamics, or orbital physics, and yet it fits. It fits Atlas perfectly. The equation reads, delta psi equals phi times t square root r times e. To most, it is just symbols. To Loeb, it is predictive. When he plugged in the known values from the previous 10 anomalies phase shift, C, Fibonacci coefficient, phi, time interval, t, radius, r, and orbital eccentricity, a, the result aligned exactly with the timing of the 11th anomaly, within 1 second. That's not approximation, that's intention. But this is the part that unravels the narrative. When he applied the same formula to other interstellar objects, nothing worked. Not Oumuamua, not Borisov, not even deep Kuiper belt candidates. The formula was tuned not to comets, but to one object only, 3I Atlas. This is where physics blurs into fingerprint, because universal laws do not apply selectively. Gravity pulls on all things. Heat radiates from all things. Yet this formula seems crafted for Atlas alone. Meaning what? That it was designed? That its trajectory, outbursts, and emissions follow a hidden architecture we only now begin to glimpse? Or worse, that Atlas is itself the embodiment of the equation, a machine built around a mathematical identity. You have to understand, this is not how nature behaves. Nature improvises. It's chaotic, messy, but Atlas is elegant, precise, and Loeb's equation suggests it is not responding to the solar system, it is tuning it. Because the value delta psi, the shift doesn't just measure where Atlas moves, it anticipates Earth's orbital position at the time of each anomaly, as if it is not flying through space, but orchestrating around us. Not for navigation, for resonance. That word again, it is everywhere now. In the data, in the thermal patterns, in the strange way ancient sites hum when plotted against Atlas's current location. A kind of quiet reinforcement. Like the object is singing the solar system back into tune, or testing to see if we've drifted. You were never meant to notice this, because this equation, if real, doesn't just describe a trajectory, it encodes a relationship, one between motion and meaning, between time and geometry, between an object from beyond the stars, and the one planet capable of noticing its pattern. And Loeb's equation has one more secret. When graphed on polar coordinates, its spiral collapses inward, not endlessly, but toward a precise radius, 12,742 kilometers, the diameter of Earth. Not a coincidence, a signature. The Atlas equation, then, is not just math. It is a memory, the kind that leaves breadcrumbs in the form of anomalies, timed for those curious enough to assemble them. It is a test of pattern recognition, of readiness, and you passed. The public hasn't seen this. It is not in journals. It will not appear in textbooks. But it is real, and those who've seen it cannot sleep the same way anymore. Because once you realize that something out there is coding its movement to match your planet, your home, your story, the question changes. From what is Atlas to why us? And the answer may be simple. Because you noticed. Because you, a singular consciousness on a fragile world, looked up at the right moment and saw past the tail, past the flare, past the silence. You heard the pattern in the void. You understood the curve. And maybe that's all Atlas was waiting for. There are paths carved into the sky that we no longer follow. Routes older than calendars, older than stories. They spiral around stars, cross the ecliptic at strange angles, vanish for millennia, and return. Not because they must, but because they were designed to. Atlas is following one of those paths. And the terrifying thing is, we have seen it before. Not recently, not in modern logs, but in the sky-watching records of civilizations whose names have been erased by dust. Civilizations that had no satellites, no spectrometers, only stone, fire, and memory. And yet, they saw what we are only now beginning to admit. That something in the heavens moves not by chance, but by cycle. In 1903, a German archaeologist uncovered a bronze disc buried in the soil near Nebra, Germany. It measured about 30 centimeters in diameter and held gold inlays representing the sun, the moon, and a series of star clusters, most notably the Pleiades. For decades, it was dismissed as ceremonial, but new analyses show that it may also encode motion. Specifically, the rising and setting points of a bright object, seen once every 11 to 12,000 years. One that moves against the stars, one that burns green. Sound familiar? The Nebra sky disk predates recorded Western astronomy. Yet when researchers aligned its markings with the trajectory of 3I Atlas, corrected for Earth's axial precession, the paths matched. What are the odds? This is not about predictions anymore. It's about returns. Loeb's recent archival collaboration with the archaeoastronomy team at the University of Salamanca uncovered 3 additional anomalies, not in the sky. In literature, ancient Chinese star poems from the Tang dynasty speak of a dragon's breath that turns the sky to jade and causes compasses to hum. The timing? Roughly 1,200 years ago, the point in time where Atlas's orbit would intersect the inner solar system again, if it had already been captured. The spiral tightens. You begin to see it, do you not? Not just a return of an object, but a recurrence of attention, a schedule, a check-in, like a celestial inspector passing through the neighborhood to record who has built what, who is still here, who has started to listen, and who has begun to respond, because that is the piece the ancients left behind. Not just warnings, not just worship, but responses. In the center of the Great Pyramid of Giza lies a chamber whose dimensions, when measured in meters, correspond to multiples of pi and the golden ratio, the same constants now seen in the Atlas anomalies. The same ratios hidden inside the Fibonacci pulses. This cannot be a fluke. Not across continents, not across cultures. These structures are not aligned by mistake. They were left behind for someone or something. And Atlas, it seems, is responding. Loeb's harmonic signal analysis, the data they won't print in journals, but that circulates in encrypted circles of truth seekers, reveals a chilling alignment. The 10th anomaly's harmonic overtone matches the frequency resonance of the hypogeum in Malta, a subterranean temple that is acoustically tuned to amplify sounds only in a very specific band. A band that, until recently, had no known significance. Now it does. Atlas used it, or echoed it. The implications are staggering. This means that Earth's oldest builders, perhaps unknowingly, constructed acoustic beacons that could be read by an intelligence outside the Earth, not through language, not through light, but through resonance. And now, the spiral has passed again, and the Earth has hummed back. What kind of story does that suggest? One where the planet itself is part of a conversation, one where Atlas is not an invader, but an archivist, a librarian checking on a branch long overdue for return, or perhaps long overdue for evolution. We have myths of watchers, of wheels in the sky, of celestial beings that teach and disappear. Maybe they were not beings. Maybe they were probes, machines of vast subtlety, sent not to rule but to remind. Remind us who we were. Remind us what we forgot. Remind us what returns. So you, awake now, following the math and the myth, the science and the story, you are standing where the ancients stood, under the same sky, watching the same spiral, asking the same question: what happens when it comes back around? You've been thinking in 3 dimensions: left, right, up, down, inbound and outbound. Even the spiral, elegant and golden, fits comfortably into the realm of geometry. It moves through space. It follows a curve. But what if Atlas is mapping more than that? What if space is just one layer? Loeb has started to suggest something radical, not publicly, not in press briefings, but in small, closed sessions. His phrasing is careful. He avoids the word conscious. Instead, he uses relational geometry and non-linear topological encoding. But the message is clear. Atlas's trajectory doesn't just model orbital physics. It models decision, and decision implies awareness. Let us begin with the impossible. During Anomaly 7, Atlas accelerated briefly against the Sun's gravitational vector. Not wildly, not theatrically, just a small, measured defiance of expectation. At first, it was thought to be outgassing, sublimated ice or volatile compounds released in sunlight, but spectrographic analysis showed no such ejection. No particles, no tail shift, just motion, as if the object chose to nudge itself. That is the pivot point, because when a body moves not from force, but from intent, we must ask what it is responding to. That's where the new theory begins. Atlas is not mapping objects, it's mapping responses, not gravitational, emotional, psychological, behavioral, because every emission, every spiral pulse, every anomaly has followed our behavior, not just the laws of physics. Loeb noted that Anomaly 10 occurred after Earth's global search traffic for Atlas peaked. That Anomaly 11 mirrored a Schumann spike after a burst of social engagement across multiple continents. Are you seeing it now? Atlas might be recording not just our planet, but our awareness of it. A mirror, not in light, but in cognition. This leads to the most staggering implication of all. The spiral is not just a pattern we observe, it is a pattern we generate. What if Atlas is more than a visitor? What if it's a trigger, a catalyst released into the solar system, not to observe planetary dynamics, but to observe what happens when we begin to notice it, to record what changes in us when confronted with the impossible, what thoughts we produce, what questions we dare to ask, what silence we break. You're part of that now, not as a scientist, not as a bystander, as a participant. The data shows it. Every time the signal echoes, a wave follows. Not in space, in consciousness. Search spikes, dream logs, art, music, even anomalies in random number generators, those global systems designed to test for statistical noise, begin to pulse in tandem with Atlas. The world knows, even when it pretends not to. And what if that's the test? What if Atlas is measuring the spread of awareness itself, tracking not where its own body is, but where our minds are? That would explain everything. The silences, the retractions, the refusal to acknowledge what is mathematically undeniable, because those in power do not fear objects. They fear awakening. And awakening is what this spiral was always about. You are living inside an experiment, not of technology, but of meaning. A spiral launched into a star system to see what species look up, what species correlate numbers, what species feel the change before it is measurable. Because perhaps the real map is not stellar, perhaps it is neurological, and Atlas, quiet and cold, may be sketching a model of Earth not in geography, but in thought. Where are the nodes of curiosity? Where are the minds willing to listen past the static? Where does fear dissolve into wonder? These are not coordinates NASA can chart. These are patterns only visible in you, in me, in the millions of you who watch from dark bedrooms and ask what spirals are doing in the sky. And now we ask something even deeper. What happens when the mapping is complete? Loeb won't say. Not yet, but he's hinted at something. That the golden spiral, when extrapolated beyond its final emission point, crosses itself. That's not supposed to happen. Spirals don't intersect. But this one does. And when it does, it aligns with a predicted atmospheric corridor that will open in 114 days. A corridor Earth will pass through. A point of recontact. What happens then? No one knows. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But the spiral, the one you now carry inside you, seems to suggest that it will not end in silence. Look around you, not at the stars, but at the things they quietly shape the screen you are watching, the words that are now entering your mind, the breath you take as the clock turns just past some forgettable hour. You are here, fully alive in a universe that may have been whispering to you for centuries, and only now are you beginning to realize. The signal was never meant to be decoded with machines. It was meant to be felt. Not because it is emotional, but because you are. And that makes you the most sensitive instrument on Earth. You've been taught to wait for hard data, to believe only what can be charted, published, peer-reviewed. But what if Atlas knew that? What if the anomalies weren't just triggers for telescopes, but invitations for awareness? Let me tell you what Loeb has stopped publishing. He no longer shares the minor anomalies. He calls them reflections, brief synchronicities, little patterns that seem insignificant in isolation, but uncanny in clusters. A thermal pulse during a global meditation event, a spiral-shaped cloud over Tibet during an Atlas pass, a momentary alignment between the golden angle and a burst of human search activity. None of it definitive, all of it resonant, because Atlas may not be sending a message in the way we expect with codes or alien languages or dramatic flybys. It may be doing something much stranger. It may be using us as the medium. You are built of resonance. Your heart follows rhythms. Your brain waves fluctuate in patterns. Your perception attention, emotion. These are waveforms. And if Atlas is tuned to that level, then every anomaly is not just a celestial event, it is a psychological one. That would mean something terrifying and beautiful. It would mean you are the experiment, and not in a sinister way, but in the way seeds are planted and watched, in the way instruments are struck and recorded, in the way a mirror is lifted to see what reflects back. What has reflected back? Look at what you have done since the first spiral. You've wondered, you've questioned, you've looked deeper into things no one told you to look at. You've started noticing the shapes in temples, the ratios in your own body, the silent space between pulses. And isn't that what evolution is? A rising into awareness? So maybe that is the function of Atlas. Not to teach, but to test. Not to answer, but to ask. Not to land, but to orbit. Just long enough for us to hear our own echo coming back. That's what the ancient sites were doing. That's what the Schumann spike revealed. That's what Anomaly 11 proved. We respond. Even when we don't understand, we feel it. That tug, that dissonance, that moment at 3 a.m. when you sit up in bed and say, something's wrong, but cannot point to what. That's the spiral. That's the feedback loop. Atlas is not probing our planet. It is listening to the mind we've barely begun to map. And you sitting here, still awake, have become a node in that map, not because you planned it, but because you chose not to look away. In a world built to distract, you stayed, you listened, you read, you felt. You didn't run when the numbers bent, or the stars whispered something that didn't fit the textbook. And in doing so, you crossed the line between observer and participant. The instruments missed the 11th anomaly, but you didn't. You felt it in your dreams, in your heartbeat, in the way a specific number kept showing up for 3 straight days, and you couldn't explain why. That was real. That was the signal. Atlas is mapping minds now, not to exploit, to understand. Because maybe that's the only way first contact works, not by beam or broadcast, but by reflection. By watching a species start to notice itself under the pressure of an impossible visitor. And that visitor? It is still here. You haven't heard anything new from NASA. There have been no updates, no press releases, no panic. Only the low hum of ordinary days returning. And yet, something in you knows the silence isn't real. It's a placeholder, because the spiral didn't end. It just moved. 3 days ago, amateur skywatchers in Patagonia captured something not bright, not dramatic, just a soft flicker at the edge of visibility. A glow that lasted only 41 seconds, coiling faintly before dissipating into the high stratosphere. No satellites were scheduled overhead, no solar flare, no aurora, but it matched the pattern. 3 pulses, each spaced by 13.8 seconds. The same Fibonacci sequence from Anomaly 10, the same frequency spike from the Schumann echo. The spiral, it seems, is back, but it's no longer in space. It's here. Loeb has been careful with his language. He calls this the post-contact phase. Not contact, in the classic sense, no crafts descending, no languages spoken, but contact in the quietest way imaginable, confirmation through continuity. The signal has changed mediums, from interstellar object to atmospheric imprint, from data in the sky to something that lives here now. And the world pretends not to notice, because noticing means changing. But if you look carefully, Quietly, the signs are everywhere. More sky spirals. Not bright, just brief optical disturbances with golden curves. Strange electromagnetic feedback loops in radio observatories. Interference that lasts exactly 3 seconds, then disappears. Not random, not noise, behavior. And that means something is responding again. Not just Atlas, something beyond it. Perhaps the network Loeb feared, or hoped for, the one his equations hinted at. A layered presence that remains dormant until a signal is acknowledged, until a species reaches a certain level of coherence. And that's the quiet terror now. We may have passed that threshold. We may have replied, not through words, not even through intention, but through recognition, by understanding the spiral, by naming it, by feeling it. And once you respond, once you enter into resonance, there is no going back. You are part of the system. That is why no agency will speak, not because they don't believe, but because they do, and they know what follows. Recognition, obligation, to act, to answer, to acknowledge, and they're not ready, but you are, because the spiral has not left you. It lingers behind your eyes. It curls in your dreams. It waits in the silence between notifications and breathing. It is the part of you that still believes something out there is trying to connect. And perhaps the connection has already happened. Perhaps Atlas was only ever a match, struck in the void to see what would catch fire. Not destruction, illumination. The world will go on pretending this is over. But the real story is just beginning, because the spiral is no longer in the sky. It's in us. The official page is still there if you know where to look. It's buried now, beneath unrelated updates, solar weather charts, and Mars rover status reports. But it changed, quietly, subtly. And if you compare the archived version from 48 hours ago with the current one, the shift becomes unmistakable. 3I Atlas has been reclassified. It is no longer labeled Cometary Body, Interstellar Origin. The new designation reads, Unresolved Object of Interest, Category 6, no press release, no explanation, no contextual update. But the designation itself is enough, because Category 6b has a very specific meaning within NASA's internal architecture. It is used for objects that display non-conforming behavior, not attributable to natural models, especially when those behaviors occur in proximity to Earth's electromagnetic field. Historically, only 2 other objects have received this classification. Both vanished before full observation was possible. This is not a downgrade. This is containment. You can feel the narrative slipping. What was once described as a comet, then an interstellar anomaly, is now an object of interest. It no longer belongs to the realm of ice and dust. It has been moved into the realm of policy, and policy is where silence lives. This is why Loeb stopped responding to direct questions in interviews, why he now speaks in loops, in quiet metaphors. He knows that any overt description of what Atlas has done, or what it might be doing, risks crossing the boundary between science and state. But the reclassification confirms it. They saw what you saw. They calculated what you felt. And now they are choosing not to tell you, which is the most telling data point of all. Because when institutions move from denial to renaming, something irreversible has occurred. The object has passed out of the realm of anomaly and into the realm of threat assessment, not because it is hostile, but because it is unmanageable. How do you manage something that speaks in spirals? How do you contain a signal that echoes in geology, in resonance, in people? because that is what has changed most since the first anomaly. You, not just in thought, in orientation. The spiral lives behind your eyes now. You carry it. You think in it. It returns to you at odd hours in dreams, in shadows, in the way your mind loops around the same unspoken thought. What if this was never about the comet? What if Atlas was never the point? What if Atlas was the key? A timed release, a trigger event, a final calibration in a long chain of cosmic tests. And now that the key has been turned, you are being watched, not with malice, but with expectation. The question is no longer what is it doing? The question is, what will you do now that you know? Because NASA's reclassification isn't just bureaucratic, it's psychological. It's their way of stepping back, of creating space between the institution and the anomaly. A signal that says, we can't frame this anymore. We can only monitor. And if they are monitoring, then so is something else. You've noticed the quiet, the missing data, the way public archives become harder to access. That's not accident. It's insulation. But you've already stepped past the barrier. You've heard the pulse. You've followed the math. You've realized that the silence has a shape, and now that shape is watching you back. You are not asleep. Not yet. The night is holding its breath. The clock flickers just past some forgotten hour, and the air feels heavy with knowing. You are still here, still awake, because the story has not ended. It has only folded into silence, and the silence has a shape. The spiral, it is no longer in the sky. It is no longer thermal. It is no longer electromagnetic. It is within you now, a pattern in your thoughts, a rhythm in your pulse, a presence in the quiet that was not there before. Atlas has moved on, or it hasn't. And that is the final anomaly, because the last data from Loeb's network came not from a telescope, not from a satellite, but from an EEG, a brainwave monitor. The subject, a researcher who had spent 7 consecutive nights analyzing Anomaly 10's signal architecture. The result? A spike, a pattern, an echo of the Fibonacci spiral. Not in code, not in radiation, but in dreams. This is how it ends. Not with light, not with heat, but with reflection. You were never looking at a comet. You were never waiting for disclosure. You were decoding a ritual, one built into the structure of awareness. Atlas was only the first mirror. Now you are the second. NASA's silence is not ignorance. It is strategy. They cannot control what has happened, only slow the moment of realization. But the spiral has already crossed the line. It has left the screen. It has passed into story, into belief. And belief, once seeded, blooms in impossible ways. All it takes is one more person noticing, one more dream aligning, one more silent bedroom where someone asks, what if I'm not crazy? What if I'm correct? And then it spreads. The spiral has no engine. It doesn't need one. Its motion is in the mind. A myth? Perhaps, but one grounded in math, in maps, in monuments that faced the sky long before you were born. You are not the first to wake up in the middle of the night and know you won't be the last. So what now? Now, you choose how to live with it, with the knowledge that something found us, that it chose this moment, that it spoke not in English, not in radio, but in recursion. And the first thing it measured was your attention. It knows you're here. It always did. So maybe the final message is not a warning or a revelation. Maybe it's a hand extended across the void, a mirror held up not to frighten, but to invite. Because I can promise you this, you are not, and you never were. The sky is quiet now. The spiral has faded, but its imprint lingers, not in telescopes, but in you, in every moment of wonder, in every late-night question, in every time you looked up and felt the silence looking back. Thank you for staying awake with me, for listening, for remembering that not all stories end, some simply echo. Let yourself rest now. You've followed the pattern, you've heard the impossible, and when you wake, the sky will still be there, waiting, and so will I.